Bye, everyone. Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, Tony. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too.
I once heard somebody say it is good to be seen, and it truly is good to see you and to be seen. Guys, if you're able to, those of you that are at EGS, we're very excited today to share with you a very, very, I'd call him a noble man. And also would like to share with you, those of you that are joining us live on YouTube, welcome. And we wanted to say to you that the first part of our program will be the share your story part. And in this part, we want to celebrate the stories of our participants in the program. We recognize that stories matter. With our stories, we liberate, and with our stories, we oppress. And in this case, we choose to be liberators of people. And so without further ado, we will be transitioning to the My Story with another Tony. By the way, Tony, there's two Tonys today. We have another Tony who's presenting, and then we'll go from there. But I think before Tony goes on, there's probably a video going before you, Tony. Good to see you, Tony, as well.
Good to see you.
Tony, you could, Tony 2, Tony 2 from EGS. We're ready for you, brother.
Is it my turn? I'm not sure I understood correctly. Wait, I'm not.
It's the student, then we'll be going with you shortly, sir.
Very good.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I was saying, sorry, I thought that you could hear me because I could hear you, but I need permission to share my screen, or if you can please share my presentation for me, then I'll start. Thank you. Yes. Well, sorry for the audio problem, but now we can start. I want to thank you all for being here. I'm really nervous and I'm really glad to be here today. I just wanted to share that with you because has happened a lot of things today, and this moment will be something that I want to give because today I've received a lot. So, hi everyone at EGS. It's really nice to see you again this week. And today I want to talk about how being young is our biggest asset. It doesn't matter how old we are, being young is our biggest asset. And I want to start this talk saying that finding yourself will lead you to somewhere amazing. We heard this phrase earlier on this semester, and I wanted to bring it back again because when we are trying to find ourselves, we do things that are amazing, and then those things takes us to places that we didn't know we could get before. So keep that in mind. Today's story, it's about me, and I want to start saying that during our life, a lot of people is going to tell us that we are not capable of doing things, that we are not ready for doing things. And in my case, so much people has told me that I'm too young to do things. But I want to say something, and is that you have to ignore those no's. You have to ignore those pressures, and you have to go forward. In that list, I just put a few no's that I heard prior in the past months, years, even in my whole life. And it is that the people have told me that I'm too young to compete in my category. I'm too young to overcome obstacles. I'm too young to be a football coach. I'm too young to teach from experience. I'm too young to do so much. I know that one, everyone has heard it. I know another one is that you're too young to represent your league. And another one is that you're too young to have an important job because I'm only 19. And I paste that Ratatouille photograph, it's intentional. And I put, soy una rata, no puedo cocinar, which means like in the movie that not everyone can cook. But the phrase in the movie is that everyone can cook. So everyone can do great things. It doesn't matter how old we are. And I want to talk to you about my past. Because when they told me that I was really, really young to compete in that category, I became a 100-kilometer national and international champion in that category. Even the Mexican Federation told me that I wasn't able to do that, and I still did it. Then people told me that I was too young to overcome obstacles. I was too young to improve a lot in a short period of time. Because in my football team, we had lost every single game that we had from 8 years old to 13 years old. In our season, when we were 14 years old, we were undefeated champions. And this was only because we thought that we could do it. We thought that we could improve. We thought that we were capable of getting better every day, and then we did. After that, when I entered high school, I loved football and I started coaching. And the parents of the kids told me that I was too young to coach because you're only 15 years old. What can you teach? What can you know at this age? How able you are to manage kids? And I actually took that very personally because I thought that it wasn't about age. It was about passion. And that passion wakes me up every day, and that passion lifts me up when I'm in the lowest. So I coached during 4 years. And with my coaching staff, we were 4 years in a row undefeated champions. So after those 4 years, those dads that didn't want me in that category actually love me. Now I'm even a godfather of some of the kids. So yeah, you can change and you can prove others that you're not too young to do things. Also, people told me that I was too young to teach from experience, that at 18 years old, you have nothing to teach because you have lived very less years, very short years. And then I developed a workshop for Exatex. Exatex all around the world come to every campus in Mexico to speak about a lot of things. And they are GMs, they are coordinators, they are managing their own companies. And how an 18-year-old kid is going to teach them something? Well, I developed a workshop on how to do conferences, and I speak to the GM of General Motors. I speak to one of the GMs on P&G Mexico. I speak to the CFO of Nestlé Latin America, and I taught them how to make a conference and how to make a workshop at 18 when people told me that I couldn't. Then I was an ambassador doing 3 years. I traveled to New York, to Massachusetts, to Canada, to Disney even, and I started learning lots of things. And I'm very proud of this because people told me that at 15 years old, you're not mature enough to have a job. And I actually married to that job and get into that job for 3 years, 3 whole years. Then, just closing this, when I was 14, I became I became part of the national football team under 15 years. And then when I was 16 and when I was 17, I was part of the national football team under 17 years. And people told me that I was too young to participate in those categories because I was a year younger. But that didn't mean that I couldn't do it if I wanted to. So all of those things that I mentioned before took me to where I am today. Today, I just left my passion. I just stopped playing football because I moved to another city. I became a pet dad, a dog dad, and it's really challenging. And I want to share that with you today because it's one of the challenges that I have now. But the biggest challenge that I have is that I started working just a few months ago. And I actually know that some of you know that. And when I entered this job, I thought that I was going to do very little things, not important things. Because when you start working, you don't imagine what you're going to do. And then I realized that I was doing an internship with the leader of marketing of the whole Mexico Royal Canin Company. So I was afraid at first. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know anything about working in the real world. And nowadays, I'm the manager. I'm sponsoring a football team. I'm sponsoring a soccer team. I'm giving people because we are sponsoring campaigns of grooming and lots of things. And what I meant on this is that when you're young, people told you that you're not going to have an important job, that whatever you do is not important, does not have an impact on the people that is around you. And that isn't true because being young is just a number. Then I want to talk about why and on what things I'm thankful. First, I'm thankful on never saying no. Never saying no is one of the coolest and the hardest and maybe the worst things you can do because you can get into situations that you don't know how to manage. You can get into situations that are very hard for you because you don't know what to act or how to act. But never saying no is going to take you to places that you don't imagine. Because never saying no is going to lead people and events and moments to you. Because those moments and those people know that you're always going to say yes. Now, the second thing I'm thankful of is that you need to walk your path with fear. And why I say this? Because when you're young, you're afraid of lots of things. And people put that scare and that fear on your back. And sometimes we tend to say no or to back off when we are afraid. But we shouldn't do it we should walk with that fear. We should embrace that fear and go further and go to front and never say no. And the third thing I'm thankful of is that during my short life, during these 19 years, I'm able to teach and show others that some impossibles are possible. And I mean this, as I said before, like if you can impact one life, then you have done a lot. And if I can teach to someone one thing from my heart, from my experience, from the stone I have tripped on, then I'm really happy too. So those are three things that I'm very thankful of. And I want you to keep in mind these two things. Our value isn't what we do. Our value isn't measured by the things we do. It's measured by who we are. And finally, I want to say also that we need to walk and create our path while we're working. But what I mentioned is because we need to discover opportunities. And discovering opportunities is one of the biggest things that has happened to me. And I have this magic recipe that is only 3 steps away. And it is that first, you need to do things that you love. And you're going to discover things and opportunities doing that. If you have a hobby, if you play a sport, if you love to watch Netflix series, then make that an opportunity to learn, to grow, to go somewhere, to make a business of it, to make someone sponsor your activity, or even make that opportunity to just be a more fulfilled person. Because you don't need to accomplish things. Maybe you just need to accomplish you. Then the other thing that I discovered to have opportunities is that opportunities come in unexpected events, moments, or people. When you're walking through life, there is going to be a lot of things that you didn't plan, a lot of things that you didn't see coming. But in those unexpected events, in those unexpected moments, is where you have the greatest opportunities in life because you didn't saw them coming. Your path maybe is a straight line to where you want to go. But with those moments and with those opportunities, maybe your path can change. Maybe your path can be difficult, maybe or harder, maybe easier. But taking those opportunities is going to lead you to somewhere else because you didn't know that those opportunities were going to come to you. Finally, the third thing is that you need to be ready always for the next opportunity. And I mean this as an advice, because when you're ready for an opportunity, opportunities come to you. Opportunities appear to you when you're ready for them. And sometimes where you think that you're not ready for them, they appear because you really are. Life puts things in our paths because we're going to be able to sort them. So always when you think that you're not ready, you're ready. And when that opportunity comes to you, just think that you are capable of doing anything, even if the people around you say that you couldn't. Now, I want to close this thing with two phrases. This one came up yesterday, and is that you're always too young to do things that took much longer to others. People that is older than us is going to tell us that maybe we are not able to do things. People that is older than us are going to tell you that things are possibly harder than we think because they have walked that path. But their experience is really different to what you're experiencing. So always when people say no, always when people say that you're too young to try, you are too young to give it a go, you are too young to jump off that cliff, do it. Because if life put you in that situation at that age, it's because you're ready to do so. And just closing up, it's never too early to try. It's never too early to try because being young is our biggest asset. It doesn't matter if we're 15, if we're 20, if we're 50 years old, we are still too young to do the things that life puts in our ways. So thank you very much. I hope that I have led someone in each and every one of you. I send you a hug. Thank you for this opportunity and have a nice weekly dialogue session.
Thank you so much, Tony, for that message. And I think the big takeaway for all of us is to not underestimate the value of our youth. And our guest today is very familiar with that. You know, when he was given the task at the age of 23 to do some of the work that began here in Mexico that he's done, I believe, unless I have my information wrong, but I think his journey started for him as well as a very young man. And he's going to tell us his story, and we'll proceed with the session. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to really just thank Mr. Karam for coming to us and giving us this time with us. Please open your books and pads. We are going to be on a pursuit of an abundant life that has a foundation of happiness and joy. And with that, I'd love to welcome you, sir. The floor is yours. I didn't want to tell your bio. I wanted you to tell your own story because I didn't want to take away or add to it, but I wanted you to tell it yourself, sir. Thank you so much for being here.
So tell me, how long should I take for this first part of the program?
You could go about 45 minutes, sir.
Okay.
45
and
minutes.
then we'll have
break.
the break and then a session, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I have to confess that I always feel a little bit awkward and uncomfortable about speaking about myself. I get the sense that it tends to become an exercise in self-importance, which is basically one of the essential causes of suffering and pain in our lives. But I hope that my life's journey is of benefit, or at least is informative to you. You know, I'm the president and founder of Tibet House Mexico, which is the official cultural center and representation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, who, as you very well know, for most of his life served as the the political representative of the Tibetan people, now in exile, as a consequence of the illegal occupation of Tibet in 1950 by the People's Republic of China and its army, the Red Army. And from 2013 onwards, he left that position. He retired from his political activities, at least from the official assignment that he had till that time, from very young, from his very early age, from 15 onwards, and basically has embraced his spiritual leadership, not only of the Tibetan people, but I think that with time he has become one of the most influential spiritual figures of the 20th and 21st century. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama asked me to start this journey in 1986 when I was studying in Dharamsala, which is the community where His Holiness the Dalai Lama took root after his exile from Tibet, and where he settled the Tibetan government in exile, which is called the Central Tibetan Administration, and where he was accompanied by more than 150,000 Tibetans out of around 6 million that resided in Tibet before the Chinese occupation of its territory. You have to keep in mind that during the first couple of decades of the very brutal Chinese occupation of Tibet, more than 1/6 of the population of the roof of the world perished as a consequence of the different policies and the violent acts that the People's Republic of China and the Red Army implemented in Tibet. So out of the 6 million Tibetans, about 150,000 Tibetans were able to flee in 1959 with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, after spending about 10 years trying to function as a mediator between the Chinese occupying authorities in Tibet and the Tibetan people. After his life was placed in very grave risk, and he finally was able to discern that his presence in Tibet would not lead to a positive resolution of the Tibetan conflict, he fled from Tibet as a result of his life being endangered. he was threatened with being captured and taken as a political prisoner to China and settled in India, where at that time, Pandit Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first democratic leader of independent India, welcomed His Holiness the Dalai Lama and this host of refugees that accompanied him through this very, very difficult and painful journey where they had to leave home, where they had to renounce to all of their belongings, to their relatives. It was a very painful and different process, as it still is for those that are able to flee from Tibet even today. Around 3,000, 3,500 Tibetans per year, no? And that is because the Chinese have very efficiently closed the frontiers between Tibet and India. And it is a life-threatening situation trying to escape from Tibet. So then His Holiness the Dalai Lama established in 1950 the Central Tibetan Administration in Exile, and did a monumental job in trying to rescue what was left of the Tibetan civilization, and specifically the crown jewel of Tibet, which is its spirituality, the Buddhist culture and tradition, no? Setting monasteries, educational centers, schools all over India and different parts of the world where Tibetans settled over the years. And in 1985, when I was a student in Dharamsala at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, which is an institution that His Holiness the Dalai Lama set forth very early during his stand in India in the early 1960s, in order to house a big collection of relics, of statues, and primarily of texts of Buddhist books that were rescued from the demolished Tibetan monasteries, or what could be taken out of Tibet by those that were able to flee, no? Sometimes only taking with them one text or a little statue or something of that nature. So the Tibetan library was set in order to house these treasures that were saved from devastation in Tibet. And very early in the 1960s, both him and several very prominent Tibetan scholars set a very pioneering educational program on Tibetan studies for Westerners, where the first generation of Westerners were able to interact with the living tradition of Buddhism in Tibet. No, I belong to the second generation of Westerners that were able to interact with these great scholars that had lived most of their lives in Tibet, were trained in Tibet, were educated in Tibet. And they were, as a consequence, I think the result or the effect of the great death of that spiritual culture and civilization. And of course, since I was very young, my hero had been His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now all of you have to keep in mind, and I think this is probably very difficult for you, that this is the pre-internet era, no? So we didn't have mass communication. It was very difficult to get a hold of any type of material news with regards to countries, cultures, and spiritual traditions as alien and far away as the Tibetan one was for us, no? But since I was very young, my mother used to say, she passed away about 3 years ago, that when I was about 3 years old, I used to say, and I used to tell her that I was disheartened and confused about why I was born in Mexico and why I wasn't born in Tibet. No? Now you have to keep in mind that at that time, nobody knew much about Tibet. It was a culture completely alien, especially to Latin America, and particularly to Mexico. So my mother was very surprised and didn't know what to make of this assertions, no? Since I was very young, I had these visionary experiences, sometimes in dreams and sometimes in the waking state, where I experienced like images that flashed in the space of my mind of a place of very high mountains, tapped with snow, in a place where men wore women's skirts, which is the way that a child conceives of somebody wearing a monastic tunic, no? I had these images of violence where soldiers came into these monasteries and devastated them, bombarded them, or assaulted these peaceful monks who tried to do all in their power to defend themselves and the community that depended on them. So this was a very turbulent type of experience that arose and manifested recurrently in my mind. Now, at my age, 57, and after so many things and experiences that have well enriched my life, I understand these to be memories of a previous life, probably in Tibet, or certainly in Tibet, no? And this explains to me this very intimate, very close bond that I have had with this culture and with these people at the roof of the world since I was very young, no? So then when I was around 8 years old, I had an uncle that lived in Argentina who came only for one time to visit Mexico. He lived in Bariloche, and he brought with him a book that he was reading that's called The Way of the White Clouds. Now, this is a very seminal text. It was the spiritual autobiography of Anagarika Govinda. Anagarika Govinda was a scholar on religious studies. He was born in Peru, he was born in Bolivia, actually. But since he was of German descent, traveled very early on with his parents to Germany, where he was educated and where he lived most of his youth. And then he also became passionately interested about the comparative study of religion. And during that process, he was exposed to the Buddhist tradition that at that time was basically a literary tradition, because as Westerners, we didn't really have intimate or close contact with Buddhist scholars around the world. Of course, as Westerners, particularly in Europe and places like England, there had been a presence of the British Raj in Asia, in India, in Burma, and with that, English people were exposed to Buddhist cultures in the Himalayas also, of course, in places like Sikkim that became part at that time by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century of the British Raj. But as you probably all very well know, the British were very culturally racist. And in that sense, they didn't really much care about the cultures that became part of the great empire. And they basically imposed Western and Anglo-Saxon values and ethics and Christian culture onto these places, no? So even though that Westerners and Europeans had a physical presence in Asia for at least a century or a century and a half, they weren't much interested in their cultures or in their spiritual traditions. So there was very little knowledge, and the little knowledge that existed was basically literary, and it was not, presential. So Anagarika Govinda, this great German scholar, became exposed to Buddhist ideas and fascinated by Buddhist ethics, Buddhist philosophy and spirituality. So he traveled to Sri Lanka, where one of the most early traditions of Buddhism has been preserved for generations, for more than 2,500 years. And he became a student of some of the great Buddhist adepts of Sri Lanka. But he felt that there was something missing, that he had not been, in a way, able to accomplish what he looked for or to resolve his life's issues. And then when he was in India, he met in Darjeeling, which is a small tea-producing town in the frontier between India and Tibet, one of the greatest Tibetan adepts and masters of the 19th century, Domo Geshe Rinpoche. And he was so struck by the personality of this man, who he recognized as somebody of exceptional human stature, no? That he understood that this was a man from which he not only wanted to learn, but this was a man that he wanted to imitate in his life. This is a distinction that I think is very important. And it has been to me in the relationship that I have established with the Buddhist tradition and with great masters like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Through my life, I have been able to study in many prominent universities. I have developed great admiration for many different scholars and academics, but I never developed this aspiration to become what they were until I met the great Tibetan adepts, where they were not only great scholars and great erudites, but they were also exceptional human beings that had been able to accomplish something that I believe is part of the essence and object of life, which is actualize a genuine dimension of happiness and of well-being that does not depend on what we derive from the world, but in contrast, what we bring to the world, no? So then Anagarika Govinda met this great Tibetan adept, Domo Geshe Rinpoche, became his student, and then understood that this was the spiritual path that he wanted to trend through his life. And then he got married to a very talented Indian Parsi artist called Ligotami. And before the Second World War, decided to make a pilgrimage to Tibet. Now you have to keep in mind that at that time, Tibet was a closed country for foreigners. You could not travel to Tibet. It was completely sealed. But Anagarika Govinda managed to do so and spend several years in Western Tibet, basically making sketches of one of the oldest capitals of the old Tibetan kingdom that was called Guge, Tsaparang, the capital of the Guge kingdom in Western Tibet. At that time, in 1933, the ruins of Tsaparang were still basically intact, and he was able to copy with his wife all of the beautiful, very early Buddhist frescoes of the cathedrals of Tsaparang. Then he went back to India. He was later on caught at the beginning of World War II. He was imprisoned at a concentration camp for Germans in the frontier between India and Tibet. And then with Rabindranath Tagore at the end of the war, he founded this wonderful university, humanistic university, and became one of the most prominent figures, Western figures, in the dialogue between the West and Tibet. So then this uncle that had visited Mexico in around 1972, 73, he was reading the autobiography of Anagarika Govinda that's called The Way of the White Clouds, that describes his journey to Western Tibet. And when he left Mexico, he forgot this book. I was always very curious. I started reading this book. And when I started reading the book became something like a revelation to my being. No? I started immediately getting this sense of deja vu, of recognition of the places that he was describing in the Himalayas, of these places of mountains and white clouds, of this civilization centered on the achievement of enlightenment. It is very often said that the national gross product of Tibet was enlightenment, no? Instead of producing cars or producing airplanes or producing phones, what the Tibetans manufactured was enlightened beings, no? That was the thrust of the classical Tibetan civilization. So when I started reading this book, I got this very profound sense and conviction that I had to start not a journey forward, but more a journey to go back to the place I belong to the place of my childhood dreams, to the place where I came from, no? And I started collecting everything that I could find in the newspapers about the Dalai Lama, about the teachers of the Dalai Lama, about Tibet and the conflict of Tibet, about the genocide that had been implemented by the Chinese communists in the roof of the world, which took 1/6 of the population of Tibet, which destroyed 6,000 monasteries out of 6,000, maybe 17 monasteries, most of the spiritual and cultural infrastructure of classical Tibet, a country that had 2,250,000 square kilometers of territory, meaning that it is a country bigger than Mexico, which constitutes 1/3 of the present People's Republic of China, and where most of the water of Asia is born. So you can imagine the strategic importance that Tibet has in Central Asia. So then, when I was 13 years old, I was traveling with my parents in the United States, in Denver. And by that time, I had read tons of things, what little was available about Tibet. And one of the things that were available at that time was the autobiography of the first Tibetan that studied in the West, in the 20th century, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who founded the first Tibetan monastery and Tibetan Cultural Center in Scotland, in England, and then became a professor at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And he traveled to the United States, and he founded one of the first Tibetan cultural and spiritual centers in the United States. So he wrote a beautiful book that's called Born in Tibet, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I had read that book when I was about 12 years old. It had been, as I previously said, a reading that really struck me, that really inspired me, and generated this conviction that this was the path I wanted to follow in my life. Then I was walking in Denver when I got distracted, and I bumped into this man. We both fell in the street, and to my amazement, the man that I had bumped into was the great Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, this great pioneering Tibetan scholar that had written this book, Born in Tibet, and had become and became, in the 1970s and 80s, one of the most influential spiritual leaders of the counter-revolution in the West. So this was like a sign that I had this connection to Tibetan culture. He invited me to visit him in Boulder, and I started doing this in the summers. I began studying the Tibetan language. And then when I finished high school, I decided that I wanted to delve more deeply in my education in Tibetan studies. So I went to Germany, and at Heidelberg University, I started studying Sanskrit and Tibetan. Now this is around 1983, 82 approximately. So all you guys weren't even born, probably. And then when I was, my parents asked me, I told them that this is what I wanted to do. But at that time, Tibetan studies was something completely exotic, you could say. It was offered in very few places in the world. There were very few serious places where you could academically study Tibetan studies. And one of those places was the University of Wisconsin, where my teacher, Geshe Sopa, one of the principal teachers of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, became the first recognized chair, the first Tibetans to receive a chair in a Western university. And the University of Virginia also were one of the great pioneers of Tibetan studies, had founded one of the first Tibetan studies programs in the world, Dr. Jeffrey Hopkins, who later on would also become one of my teachers, and several other places. And specifically, Naropa University, which was founded by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in Boulder in Colorado. So I wanted to study there, but my parents said, no, this is impossible. What are you gonna make with that in your life? But I struck a deal with them. And the deal was that if I was able to get a more traditional degree, after that, they would allow me to receive the type of education that I wanted. So then I went into what I conceived of the nearest thing to what I wanted to do, which is the study of philosophy. And to my parents' surprise, I finished my career in 2 years. No, it was a 4-year program, and I finished it in 2. I was very, very rushed to be able to finish with that part of my life and do what I really wanted to do. So one day I came back home, I presented my degree, no, and I said, well, this was the deal that we struck. Now I want to do what I want to do, and I want to study Tibetan studies with Trungpa Rinpoche at Naropa University in Colorado. So I went there. They validated the 2 years that I had studied my degree in Mexico in philosophy. And in 2 years, I did 2 careers, one in Tibetan studies, specializing in classical Tibetan, and one in Tibetan and Western psychology. There, I was able to meet several very prominent Tibetan scholars of the time, the pioneers of Tibetan scholarship, like Dr. Robert Thurman, who till this date is the head of the Jetsong Kappa Chair of Buddhist Studies at the University of New York. No, I was able to meet Dr. Jeffrey Hopkins from the University of Virginia, but most important of all, I was able to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who in 1982 made his first visit to the United States. So I went to study after that to India and to Nepal. First to Nepal to study with the teachers of my teachers, with the great Ujhen Tulku Rinpoche, who was one of the greatest Tibetan scholars of the 20th century, at his monastery in the Kathmandu Valley and his hermitages in the mountains of Kathmandu. And then I went to study at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives with Geshe Sonam Rinchen, one of the teachers of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And early on, I wanted to make a connection with the Dalai Lama. At that time, it wasn't as hard as it is today. I mean, the Dalai Lama now is a world-renowned personality, the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize and more than 150 awards all through the world, no? But at that time, the Dalai Lama had never traveled abroad. He was relatively unknown outside of the Tibetan community. So I went to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I asked for an interview in his, what they call his palace, but it's really a very modest house in Dharamsala. We connected wonderfully. I was the first Latin that could speak Tibetan directly in Tibetan to him. And I was very young at that time, so he was relatively inspired by that. And then he asked me out of the blue something that when I look at it retrospectively, it was really a completely impossible demand. He asked me to begin to found his personal cultural representation for Latin America. Now, he had founded a Tibet house in Delhi in 1967. He was about to open his first representation for the West in New York, administered by people like Dr. Robert Thurman, like Richard Gere, who later on became very close as a friend and colleague to me, and by other people like Philip Glass, the great musician. That's how Tibet House New York was started. And when Tibet House was inaugurated, they declared that year, 1987, as the International Year of Tibet. So I went to New York. I met with Richard Gere, with Philip Glass, with Dr. Thurman, who was the head of the Tsongkhapa chair at Columbia University. And we decided to found Tibet House in Mexico. This was in 1989, some weeks before His Holiness the Dalai Lama received the Nobel Peace Prize. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama had made a promise, and that promise was that if I succeeded in this endeavor, he would actually come to Mexico and inaugurate Tibet House. So when that time came, I invited His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You cannot imagine the difficulties, the challenges that having His Holiness the Dalai Lama visit Mexico implied, but we were able to succeed, and he, in effect, inaugurated Tibet House that year. And well, this year, Tibet House celebrates 33 years of life. We are the oldest Tibetan cultural and political center in the Spanish-speaking world. I have spent much of my life dedicated to the education and to the popularization of Tibetan culture in the West, not only in Latin America, but in Europe and the United States. And well, Tibet House has grown little by little from a very small institution that had 2 or 3 students where I did everything from teach to do the sweeping of the floors and cleaning, etc., to an institution that has more than 2,000 members, 19 centuries in Mexico, Latin America, and the United States. And we have become the referent of cultural and spiritual Tibetan institutions in the world. So this is a little bit about my life, my career. I became not only a Buddhist scholar, but also I became a Buddhist Lama, recognized by several very influential Tibetan scholars, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the first Latin Lama, the first Spanish-speaking Lama in the West. And well, this is a little bit of my story.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. The first thing I just want to say to you is the names that you were calling out. I was trying to write and keep up. I thought, no, I'm just going to have to ask him later. How do you remember those names, Tony? I mean, like, boom. Do you have them written down in front of you?
No. These have been people that are important in my life. I couldn't forget them.
I want you to take us back to the first encounter that you have with the Dalai Lama, and he gives you this assignment, if you will. Are you scared? Are you excited?
Well, I was very nervous because His Holiness the Dalai Lama is bigger than life. You know, Tibetans call the Dalai Lama Kundun, which means the presence. And when you're in front of the Dalai Lama, he has this type of presence, this energetic presence that makes you feel as if you were pressed by a balloon onto the wall, no? As if when he comes into the room, he fills it completely. He's like a mountain. He's like a force of nature, no? In a way. So when you're in front of the Dalai Lama, he's very threatening in that sense because he's so powerful.
Wow.
But I mean, I had enormous devotion for him. He's regarded or conceived of as the incarnation of the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara Chenrezig, in the Tibetan cultural world, no? And of course, I had studied with some of his teachers, and I came very well recommended. But at the same time, just meeting him was something amazing, no? There's Tibetans that are willing to risk their lives in order to flee from occupied Tibet, in order to simply have an audience with His Holiness Dalai Lama, which they regard as the highlight of their lives, no? So here I was in my early 20s, 21 years old. I was meeting with Kundun, with the presence. And well, we began to talk. He asked me many things about my training, my education, about my teacher, especially Geshe Lundup Sopa, who was my teacher at the University of Wisconsin, who was one of the most important teachers of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He immediately opened his heart to me because he had great devotion for this man, for this teacher. And then he said what I wanted to do with my life. And I told him I wanted to take monastic vows and dedicate my life to the monastic spiritual tradition. He said, no, not in your case. And he said, this is the time for hidden monks. And your mission in this life is different. So I do not allow you to become a monk. You have to do this other task. You have to accomplish this task for which you made promises in a previous life, to help the Tibetans in their most dire hour of need. And you have to help us in the Spanish-speaking world. And this is what you have to do. And of course, I did what any 20-year-old would do, as I was hearing Tony speak, full of passion about his youth, very similar to how my youth was. I thought I could accomplish everything. I could do everything. So of course, I told the Dalai Lama, yes, no worries, I'll do it very simply. Now, if I had known what I know now, 33 years after that, I would have said, no, by no means, I'm not able to do this. But I did it the only way that at that time was possible, which was with complete irresponsibility and complete ignorance. And then, well, with great passion and devotion, little by little, was able to accomplish something very important. I was able to bring His Holiness the Dalai Lama 4 times to Mexico, 2 times to Latin America, and to establish Tibet within our worldview and culture. And this, I think, has been my life's task. And I've been able to educate more than 350,000 people over the last 33 years. So it's been a journey.
So, I've been in Mexico for about a year, and one of the things I recognize about Mexican culture is family. So I want you to take us back to your mother's kitchen, and you come home and say, Mom, yeah, I was hanging out with the Dalai Lama, and guess what? He asked me to do this little work, and what was that conversation like?
Well, you can imagine that both she and my father and my grandfather at that time, who was a very influential personality in our family, they were completely, well, my mother, who loved me dearly, said, you can do whatever you want and you can accomplish anything you wish. But my father and my grandfather said, this is nonsense. There's no future in what you want to do. But they said, but if you want to try it, we'll support you, no? And they did. And some months after that, the Dalai Lama was in Mexico. His first visit became a world-renowned event. And I think that when my parents had their first audience with the Dalai Lama, it was then that they understood that this was a path with a heart, that this was something of great transcendence and importance. And because the Dalai Lama had such a great impact in them, they had never met somebody of that tenure, of that stature, of that presence, no? They understood that I was in good hands and that what I was doing with my life was something worth doing, no? And they supported it from then onwards. But of course, they never imagined it would become something so successful, no? And when it did, they were very proud. I don't think proud of what I was doing per se, but simply proud that I became a famous person. That was, I think, what really made them proud.
Wow. No, I'm equally proud. So, one of the things, especially with young people, is this idea of pursuing your passion, your life work, your calling, some people call it. That
path
road,
with a heart.
Yes, that road. Could you maybe we could begin talking about this journey that we're on to happiness. Could you kind of just give us a little bit about your childhood? We want to humanize Tony before we get the lessons of leadership. Tell us about your childhood a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Well, I had a difficult childhood, Masuma. I had an illness when I was very young. I've always had a pulmonary and bronchial deficiency, which little by little I've been able to overcome. But when I was very small, detonated a type of meningitis. And when I was around 2 years old, I was struck with this very intense and very powerful infection that caused or produced very high temperatures. So they had to keep me, in order to survive, in a refrigerating capsule for 5 days in order to keep my fever down. And when this happened, I suffered from brain injury, no? And it took me decades, a couple of decades, or maybe 18 years to be able to overcome, to rewire my brain, you could say, in order to transcend the impact that this illness had in my physique, no? And in my brain, and therefore in my mental abilities. So the doctors at that time told my mother that I would not be able to speak fluent Spanish. I would not be able to learn other languages, and that I would be very lucky if I was able to tend for myself in life, no? Because of the graveness of this damage, no? Brain damage. But my mother, who was really an amazing person in my life, I could say that there's 2 people that have been the love of my life. One, my mother for sure, and the other, my root teacher, Ujin Tuku Rinpoche. No, I always call them the loves of my life. No, and my mother dedicated her life to me, 24 hours a day. Took me to all types of therapies, doctors, etc. So I didn't have a very normal childhood because most of my childhood was spent trying to repair the damage that I suffered because of that illness. But that challenge also brought with it great blessings. It gave me discipline. It gave me renunciation. It gave me purpose in life. And then when I was around, you could say, of course, I was the object of bullying, and I gained a lot of weight, which again added to that bullying. But then when I was beginning lower school, no, at that time, I think I was able to overcome most of the damage that was caused by the illness in my brain. And I had great learning discipline, and I became to excel. I started to excel. And by high school, that was in the past, and I became the best student at my school. I was the valedictorian of my generation, the valedictorian of my university, and then of the university in the United States. So that was left behind with no trace, but humility.
Wow. If you had a chance to meet some of your bullies, what would you say to them today after what you know now?
I've had the chance. It was part of, I think, my life's journey. I looked for them several years ago, and we repaired our relationship. And I was convinced I had to let go of any type of energetic ties based on rancor, based on anger that were present in my life. We're in this world for a very short time, and this journey demands of us great discipline and attention. So we don't have energy to lose in regrets, in anger, and in conflict. So I repaired that relationship, and I liberated the energy that I had invested in that through my life.
Wow. So forgiveness is like letting the prisoner go and realizing that the prisoner was yourself. Is that what you would say?
Exactly. Liberating the conflictive energy that binds you in a very neurotic way to these people, events, and memories. We have little energy, so we have to become miser energy savers, you could say. So we don't have energy to invest in conflict, no?
Wow. So you are a family man as well, and you're doing this amazing work that you're doing across Mexico and the world. Tell us how you reconcile all these commitments in your life, and if you don't mind.
Well, one thing I've been blessed with is a wonderful wife that has taken the basic responsibility of raising my children. I have two daughters, one 15 and one 10. Mila, which means cotton ball in Tibetan, a little cotton swab or ball. And Uma, which means it's like the name of one of the consorts of Shiva, the goddess of the world, you could say, no? And she takes care of my children. She has educated them in a way. I don't take much credit on that. But as you say, I'm also a family man, so the time that I have with them is quality time. I'm devoted to them. I believe in being ethical. I believe in being loving. So that's what I've tried to do, to rear them in spiritual values that transcend culture and time, to make them to bring them near this wonderful cultural and spiritual tradition, which is Tibetan Buddhism. They've been able to travel with me to India many times. They've been able to meet the Dalai Lama many times and many of the great Tibetan scholars. And through my life, I've been able to meet presidents and academics and artists, many famous people because of my work. So they've been educated in that very rich environment that has made them very free, you could say.
Wow. What time do you wake up in the morning every day?
I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I start my spiritual exercises, my meditational practice from 5 to 7. Then I have breakfast around, well, I take the kids to school, to their bus, which is near where we live, at 7 sharp. Then I have breakfast, go to Tibet House around 9 o'clock in the morning. I spend most of the day in Tibet House. I finish my classes at 10 o'clock at night, at 10 o'clock at night approximately, and come back home. I still have a little time with my wife and kids, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. And then from 11:30 to or 11 to 12, I still have time to do some reading and spiritual practice, and then wake up again at 5 o'clock in the morning. When time permits, I go back home for lunch. Most of the weekends I have to travel through Mexico and the world teaching, but I try to leave a couple of weekends a month to be at home. We're about to inaugurate a beautiful contemplative center in Valle de Bravo. We had a retreat center there, but in the last 3 years, we've been involved in incrementing the infrastructure there. And I built a little house for the family there. So we're also spending some time in Valle de Bravo. So that's what I do.
So when you are not busy doing your life's work, if I came to Mexico City and I just wanted to just hang out with Tony, just hang out, what would we do?
Well, I don't hang out. I don't have time to hang out, to be quite honest. But if what you wanted to do is spend some time with me because you needed to talk to me or to discuss something of importance, then what we probably do is we would chat here at Tibet House, or we would go for lunch. No, I love food. So it's the perfect environment for conversation and for intimacy.
Yes,
that's what we would probably do.
Wow. So
but I don't really have time for going to the movies or hobbies of that. My life is very, you could say, very dedicated to my work.
So then can I push you a little bit? You know, we live in a time where there's all these conversations of balance. Given what you're saying about your life, what would you say to the idea of balance? You know, because somebody would look at your life and say, when do you just let your head down? You know, it looks like you're on 24/7. Is there truly balance?
Yeah. Well, I think my spiritual training has allowed me to do that. No,
Yeah.
I don't think this is anybody can do without priorly generating some type of mental and energetic balance that allows one to do the type of things that I do. No, but having said that, it is not as if I don't have any time for leisure or for spending with my kids or doing other things. It's just that I've become very, how do you say, discriminative of what I want to spend my time doing. No?
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate you sharing. You know, the thing that I keep hearing from you is discipline, you know, and focus.
Yeah.
You know, and it's something that we all could learn from in terms
Definitely.
of our lives, you know, having that discipline and focus. Sir, today, you know, our journey is on happiness. And the next part after our break, we'll be embarking on some questions from the audience and then from the students. Would you like to maybe set the foundation for that in the last 5 minutes that we might have together?
Sure. Well, the idea, I think, is in the next section, spending a little time talking about the pursuit of genuine happiness.
That is
and
correct.
I think what would be nice to do is first do that, if you allow me to present some ideas,
That's
and
correct.
then open the floor. And if people want to inquire, make questions, whatever, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Perfect. So we'll do that when we come back after the break. But before we go to break in the next 5 minutes, by the way, I'm so honored to meet you. And I was curious, you said you've met lots of leaders and influencers across the globe.
Yeah.
And then when you think of the word leadership, which is our program is about, you know, leadership development, are there people that come to mind apart from the Dalai Lama that you would say to our students, you should study
sure.
individuals?
I was able to meet and to spend some time with Václav Havel, the first democratic president of the Czech Republic,
Yes,
who was a very close friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he struck me as an extraordinary politician and human being. He was basically a poet, a writer, who became the president of the Free Czech Republic, and I think embodies the best of what I can recognize as a true humanist politician. So I was very struck by him. Another person that has been a great that I was very struck by was Mother Teresa, who I was also able to spend some time with in India and work with at her asylums for the people with leprosy. And she struck me as a really remarkable human being, a person completely dedicated to the poor and the sick. So she has also been a source of great inspiration in my life. Of course, from Hollywood, Richard Gere, who's a very close friend of mine and the founder of Tibet House New York and the International Campaign of Tibet, where I also serve as part of the board of directors, and the institution that he heads, the most important pro-Tibet institution in the world. I've been able to meet so many people. The Pope, Pope Francis, who also struck me as a wonderful, an extraordinary human being, I was able to meet him during his visit to Mexico some years ago. President Bush, also in contrast to what people might think about him, in person, he's a very warm human being. He's humble. He's full of human values. He's very close to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He regards the Dalai Lama as one of his spiritual, you could say, teachers. And the Dalai Lama, and he invited me to the ceremony where President Bush gave the Dalai Lama the Congressional Medal of Honor at the Capitol of the United States in Washington. And that was one of the highlights of my life. And we spent some time with President Bush and his wife, Laura, and they struck me as incredible people also. Who else I could say has been Philip Glass, the great musician. He's also a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, and he's also a wonderful human being, very humble, very spiritually talented. So he was also a great influence in my life. So these are some of the people,
The one book that you believe every person that you meet should read.
The Way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva, one of the greatest Indian scholars of the 8th century. I think this is one of the jewels of human thought, the way of the Bodhisattva, or the Bodhisattva's way of life.
Sir, thank you so much. I appreciate your openness and willingness to share. And we're super excited to continue our conversation after the break. We have 15 minutes and we'll be meeting back here. Those of you that are on YouTube, what an honor to have a true champion for love, a true champion for joy, a true champion for peace. And we do look forward to hearing more on the back end of our break. See you all in 15 minutes. And thank you so much again, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. If you would please, if you're able to turn on your screens, please do turn on your screens. And we're very honored again to have our guest. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here again.
Well, you know, within the Buddhist context, which is one of the oldest wisdom traditions of the world, spiritual practice, what's called dharma in the Indian language, refers to a worldview. That's a way of looking at things, reality, the appearances that are manifest to our senses. A collection of meditational practices, which have as their main objective introspection, and a way of life that lead to a lasting state of genuine happiness. Now, you see, to understand what this means requires making a clear distinction between what we could call mundane hedonic pleasures and genuine happiness. Mundane pleasures are those that are aroused by pleasant stimuli, basically derived from such things as material possessions, as meaningful relationships, of course, satisfying work, and central aesthetic and intellectual activities. Now, we may also seek shortcuts to such stimuli by directly trying to influence the brain with chemicals or with electric stimulation. And although some hedonic pleasures may be very meaningful, such as naturally those derived from personal relationships and work, any pleasures we experience solely due to physical stimuli, to activating different parts of the brain, are transient. And from the perspective of the achievement of genuine happiness, meaningless at best. Now, we seem to experience hedonic pleasures in our engagement with the world, but genuine happiness arises not from what the world provides us, but from what we bring to the world. Now, this is a quality of well-being, not simply a pleasurable feeling that results from the quality of our lives, from the health and balance we cultivate in our hearts and minds, and the experiential insights into fundamental aspects of our nature and our relation with the rest of the world. Now, the pursuit of hedonic pleasure is intrinsically competitive and easily leads to strife and conflict among individuals, communities, and nations. Whilst the pursuit of genuine happiness, in contrast, draws from our inner resources. So one person's experience of a high degree of genuine happiness doesn't in any way diminish anyone else's experience. In fact, one person's experience of such well-being may inspire others to tap into their own inner resources of well-being. Now, this distinction does not imply that the pursuit of hedonic pleasure is incompatible with the pursuit of genuine happiness. The Buddha, the founder of the spiritual tradition that we call Buddha Dharma, referred to 4 kinds of relative happiness that depend on time and circumstance. The first of these is the happiness of possessing material goods that are honorably acquired. The second is the happiness of enjoying one's wealth and leading a virtuous life. And the third is the happiness of being free of debt. Now, the fourth is the happiness of having a clean conscience based on a way of life rooted in nonviolence and altruism. Now, the Buddha called this blamelessness far superior to the first 3 kinds of pleasure. Rather than implying that hedonic pleasure is antithetical to genuine happiness, the Buddha indicated that such things as adequate housing, clothing, food, and medical care are valuable supports for the practice of Dharma, that is, of the spiritual path. Now, in Buddhism, the pursuit of genuine happiness is inextricably linked to the pursuit and the understanding of virtue. Misery stems from ignorance. It stems from harmful conduct, while genuine happiness stems from understanding and cultivating virtue. There are many aspects of reality that can be understood with no basis in virtue and with none of the resultant benefits of genuine happiness. Likewise, many virtuous deeds may be committed with very little understanding and without producing any deep sense of satisfaction or well-being. But insight and wisdom that free the mind of its afflictions and lead the individual to wholeness is one of the main causes of genuine happiness and can be experienced only within the context of a virtuous way of life accompanied by exceptional mental balance. Now, in the secular world, in contrast, the pursuit of happiness, understanding, and virtue are often seen as unrelated or even incompatible. The materialistic view of happiness focuses almost exclusively on hedonic well-being, which has little to do with virtue, and it also has evidently very little to do with wisdom. Likewise, the materialistic pursuit of knowledge, especially by way of scientific inquiry, has little to do with virtue and therefore also with genuine happiness. And finally, materialism is silent concerning virtue because the word means nothing in the context of natural selection, survival, and procreation. The notion of a virtuous brains isn't often mentioned. But from a Buddhist perspective, happiness, knowledge, and virtue that are unrelated to one another are devoid of meaning and are also devoid of lasting value. Now, the foundation of all Buddhist practice is ethics, which fundamentally requires leading a life based on two principles. First, nonviolence, and secondly, altruism. Buddhists are encouraged to avoid any behavior of body, speech, and mind that needlessly harms oneself or others. And they're encouraged to be of service to others when the opportunity naturally arises. And this is very similar to the universal theme in the world spiritual traditions of treating others as we would like and have them treat us. But Buddhist ethic also includes environmental ethics, treating the animate and inanimate environment so as to nurture life in the present and future generations. And from another perspective, ethical conduct consists of behavior that is conducive to our own and others' genuine happiness. And while ethical conduct is behavior that undermines our own and others' genuine happiness, while ethical conduct consists of behavior that is conducive to our own and others' genuine happiness, unethical conduct is behavior that undermines our own and others' genuine happiness. If hedonic and genuine happiness can be differentiated in objective, behavioral, and physiological aspects, this would enable an empirical science of ethics to identify behaviors that support and undermine genuine happiness. The significance of such a science for humanity at large could be revolutionary. Individuals and communities that pursue ethical ways of life may flourish socially and environmentally, living in harmony with each other and the rest of nature. Now, although environmental ethics has come to the forefront of public attention over the past few decades, a much older attitude towards nature casts a long shadow over Western societies. Freud, for instance, expressed the view of many of his contemporaries when he declared that the way for people to find happiness is by becoming a member of the human community, and with the help of a technique guided by science going over to the attack against nature and subjugating her to the human will. Then one is working with all for the good of all. He took a particularly dim view of the worldly wisdom of the East and the practice of yoga, which he interpreted as having the ideal of killing off the instincts. If it succeeds, then the subject, it is true, giving up all other activities as well, sacrificing his life, can achieve happiness quietness. Freud expressed great antipathy toward all religions, an attitude that remains prevalent in the mind sciences to this day. The religion of mankind, he declared, consists of mass delusions in which their followers seek to find happiness and security by a collective delusion or remolding of reality. In essence, religious practices result in depressing the value of life and distorting the picture of the real world in a delusional manner, which presupposes an intimidation of intelligence. At this price, by forcibly mixing them in a state of psychical infantilism and by drawing them into a mass delusion, religion succeeds in sparing many people an individual neurosis by hardly anything more. That's what Freud said, you know. Buddhist practice is centered on overcoming individual and mass delusion, including delusional tendencies we are born with and those we acquire from our social environment. It has nothing to do with killing of all instincts, though it does emphasize the value of overcoming those instinctual tendencies of egotism, selfishness, desires, hostility, and aggression that are harmful to oneself and evidently are also harmful to others. Now, the empirical criteria in Buddhism for distinguishing wholesome from unwholesome actions, no, or tendencies or behavior is whether an action supports or undermines genuine happiness for oneself and others. And for this to be useful criterion, we must identify the nature of genuine happiness, recognizing how it differs from many counterfeits, from many imposters. Now, genuine happiness is fundamentally different from stimulus-driven pleasures. We may derive enjoyment from all forms of sensual pleasures, such as attractive visual images, sounds, aromas, taste, and tactile sensations. But as soon as we lose touch with these stimuli, naturally, the resultant pleasures fade or disappear. The same is true, if you think about it, of the satisfaction we may experience from being praised, from being acknowledged, respected, or loved. The acquisition of material goods, financial security, power, and fame may lead to happiness, but it's fleeting and it's unstable. Likewise, we may derive pleasure from intangibles, including, our professional accomplishments, interpersonal relationships, intellectual activities, and aesthetic appreciation of the arts. All such pleasures are contingent upon transient stimuli from the environment, from our interaction with other people, or from various physical and mental activities. When this stimulus cease, so the resultant pleasures that we derive from them. Moreover, there's no guarantee that pleasure will arise every time we experience such stimuli. An object or activity that once provided satisfaction may cease doing so in the future. For instance, when you eat a very delicious food, you might think that it is intrinsically delicious, an intrinsic source of pleasure, satisfaction, and thus want more and want to defend or protect that food source from anybody else. But the truth is that if you consume enough times that delicious food, it will cease to be delicious. And it is also true that it is not a source of genuine happiness. Now, when causes of happiness are contingent, there is never a linear correlation between the frequency and intensity of the stimuli and the frequency and intensity of the pleasures that we derive from it. In fact, the result of increased frequency and intensity is often a decrease in pleasure followed by boredom and rising unhappiness. Moreover, clinging to such stimuli as the source of one's well-being is bound to give rise to intermittent or chronic anxiety as one faces the possibility, likelihood, or certainty that these pleasures will not last. According to one Buddhist adage, as we grasp onto these objects, situations, and activities as the sources of happiness, there can be only two outcomes. One, eventually either they disappear, or two, eventually we disappear. Now, to distinguish between genuine happiness and its counterfeits, Imagine that all of the external support for your present sense of happiness and security suddenly were to disappear. Whatever sense of well-being remains is all that we truly have, all that was truly yours. The happiness that vanishes was merely on loan. It was contingent on transient conditions that are largely uncontrollable. We can ignore this fact and lead our lives with a false sense of security, or we can wake up to the counterfeit nature of much of our happiness and seek alternatives that are more satisfying. Many believe that achieving more authentic levels of happiness that transcend such transient, stimuli-driven pleasures depends on the cultivation of specific types of enduring beliefs and attitudes, such as learned optimism, for instance. This is the central theme of the recent trend of positive psychology, for instance, and it has long been central to the world's religions. The cultivation of wholesome priorities, attitudes, perspectives, and behaviors, naturally, is also strongly emphasized in Buddhist psychology. But the happiness that results from such mental training is certainly more authentic and more durable than stimuli-driven pleasures that are occasionally emergent from what we could call the hedonic treadmill. They are not also sources of genuine happiness. In Buddhism, genuine happiness transcends the sense of well-being that might be induced through, for instance, psychopharmaceutical interventions, the development of positive attitudes, or an increase in one's sense of self-worth. The Dalai Lama comments, for instance, I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. And whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness. Now, genuine happiness arises from the depths of a mind that is calm, a mind that is clear, that is open, and a mind that is intelligent. It's not simply a feeling, but a way of being present in the world without being thrown into emotional disbalance, disequilibrium by the problems, conflicts, and vicissitudes of life. One can still naturally savor the joys of the sensual world, human relations, meaningful activities. However, because one does not cling to them as a true source of happiness, an inner sense of well-being remains even when these external supports disappear. The direct route to such well-being is a cultivation of mental balance, which is divided in the Buddhist tradition in four, what we call conative, attentional, cognitive, and emotional balance. And for each of these four kinds of mental balance, we will identify the middle way, what we could call the path of homeostasis, as the freedom from three kinds of imbalances: deficit, hyperactivity, and dysfunction. So let's briefly attend to the first type of equilibrium, conative balance. Now, the term conation, I don't know if you've heard it before, it refers to the faculties of desire and volition. And naturally, conative balance entails cultivating desires and volitions that are conducive to our own and others' genuine happiness. Conative imbalances, conversely, are ways our desires and intentions lead us away from psychological flourishing and into psychological distress or conflict. A conative deficit occurs when we experience, for instance, an apathetic loss of desire for happiness and its causes. This is often accompanied by a lack of imagination or a kind of stagnant complacency. We can't imagine faring better than what we are now, so we don't do anything to improve our well-being. Conative hyperactivity is present when we fixate on obsessive desires that obscure the reality of the present. We're so caught up in fantasies about the future, focused on our unmet desires, that our senses are dulled to what is happening here and now, which is the only thing that truly exists. We're always somewhere else. We're in the future, we're in the past, but the past doesn't exist. It has faded away. The future has not arisen. The only thing that is truly present is now. And in this process, we may also blind ourselves to the needs and desires of others, which are as genuine, as important, as transcendent as ours. Finally, cognitive dysfunction sets in when we decide things that are not conducive to our own or others' well-being and don't desire the things that do contribute to our own and others' genuine happiness. I think it's crucial to recognize that it is not possible to cultivate individual psychological flourishing while ignoring the well-being of others. We do not exist independently from our fellow beings, so our well-being cannot arise independently of them. To flourish individually, we must consider the well-being of those around us. This is one of the basic tenets of Buddhist ethics and of Buddhist epistemology. So what kinds of goods, in the broadest sense, that includes both tangible and intangible things and qualities, are truly conducive to psychological flourishing? Well, in his book, The High Price of Materialism, Tim Kaser analyzes the relation between the materialistic value that so much dominates today's world and the well-being that we all seek. And he concludes, and I quote, "Existing scientific research on the value of materialism yields clear and consistent findings. People who are highly focused on materialistic values have lower personal well-being and psychological health than those who believe that the materialistic pursuits are relatively unimportant. This relationship have been documented in samples of people ranging from the wealthy to the poor, from teenagers to the elderly, and from Australia to Korea. Now, according to Buddhism, the true sources of mental suffering are internal mental afflictions, such as craving, hostility, delusion. But it is common for people to mistakenly identify external objects, such as people, situations, as the sources of the misery, anxiety, and frustration that we transit in life. Craving, as it is defined in Buddhist psychology, is an attraction for an object upon which one conceptually very commonly superimposes, projects, or exaggerates desire or desired qualities, while filtering out undesirable qualities. In cases of strong craving and afflictive attachment, one projects the very possibility of happiness onto the object on which one's mind is set, thereby disempowering oneself and empowering the object of attachment. For instance, this happens very often when we're romantically involved with somebody, when we're enamored by somebody. And when the reality of this idealized object of craving breaks through such fantasies, disillusionment is inevitable. And this may lead to hostility and aversion, in which one now superimposes negative qualities upon the previously craved object. Delusion that lie at the root of mental suffering are twofold: grasping onto that which is subject to change as being permanent, and grasping onto objects, people, and conditions as true sources of happiness. Sooner or later, grasping and clinging results in disappointment, in anxiety, in misery, in pain, in suffering. The cultivation of cognitive balance requires an attenuation of these mental afflictions and a clear recognition of the actual sources of genuine happiness. The second type of equilibrium, attentional balance. Attentional balance, including the development of sustained voluntary attention, is a crucial feature of mental health and optimal performance, if you think about it, in any kind of meaningful activity. It is achieved by overcoming attentional deficit, attentional hyperactivity, and attentional dysfunctionality, to which human society at large is prone, not just individuals diagnosed, for instance, with ADHD. Attentional deficit is characterized by the inability to focus on a desired object. The mind becomes withdrawn and disengaged, even from its own internal processes. Attentional hyperactivity occurs when the mind is excessively aroused, excessively stimulated, resulting in compulsive distraction and fragmentation. And attention becomes dysfunctional when we focus on things in afflictive ways, which are not conducive to our own and others' well-being. For example, a sex addict may attend to other people solely as sexual objects, and a salesperson may engage with others strictly in terms of their propensity to buy a product. Now, attentional deficit corresponds closely to the Buddhist concept of laxity, and attentional hyperactivity correlates with excitation. These imbalances are remedied through the cultivation of mindfulness, the ability to sustain continuous voluntary attention upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or without distraction. See? And this is done naturally by means of meditation, which is a central mind training in the Buddhist tradition. Now, the third imbalance is what's called cognitive balance. The distinguishing characteristic of cognitive balance is that one views the world without the imbalances of conceptual projection, omission, or distortion. Now, if you think about it, people with severe cognitive imbalances, in contrast, are radically out of touch with reality and are commonly diagnosed as suffering from several different degrees of psychosis. Normal people are also prone to cognitive imbalances, which lie at the root of much mental distress. Such imbalances are often deemed intrinsic to human nature, but this assumption, I believe, begs to be challenged by rigorous empirical inquiry. Now, following our threefold analysis of mental imbalances, a cognitive deficit is characterized by the failure to perceive what is present in our 5 fields of sensory experience and our minds, the inability to be aware of our own mental states and processes is at least as limiting as other forms of perceptual blindness, and its impact on mental health can be truly debilitating. Insofar as we are out of touch with what is occurring around us and within us, we're suffering from cognitive deficit. And cognitive hyperactivity sets in when we conflate our conceptual projections with actual perceptual experiences. We fail to distinguish between perceived realities and our superimposed assumptions and fantasies. Now, psychotic people do this in extreme ways, while other people, cognitive projections are more subtle. But we can all exhibit some degree of cognitive hyperactivity, and this results in unnecessary mental suffering. Finally, cognitive dysfunction occurs when we misapprehend reality through defects, either in our physical senses or in our ability to interpret what's happening. And finally, the last of the balances that is indispensable for optimal mental health and for the cultivation of genuine happiness is emotional balance. Now, emotional balance is a natural outcome of cognitive, attentional, and cognitive balance, but emotional imbalances can impair those other facets of mental health. An emotional deficit disorder has the symptoms of emotional deadness and a sense of cold indifference towards others. Emotional hyperactivity is characterized by excessive or even obsessive experiences of elation and depressions, hope and fear, adulation and contempt, craving and hostility. Emotional dysfunction occurs when our emotional responses are inappropriate to the circumstances, such as delighting in others' misfortune or resenting their success. Now, psychologists and contemplatives worldwide have devised an array of interventions to heal such emotional imbalances, some of them applicable to society as a whole, and others embedded in specific religious worldviews. Buddhism treats emotional imbalances with a comprehensive range of methods for counteracting such basic mental affliction as craving, hostility, delusion, or arrogance and envy. And in addition, it presents a system of meditational practices to cultivate the four wholesome qualities of what Buddhism calls loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. These four qualities are called the four immensurables because they are immeasurably beneficial to the individual, and they are geared, they're oriented toward immeasurable sentient beings. But they may be succinctly defined according to Buddhist tradition. No, loving kindness is the wish that oneself and others may find happiness and the causes of happiness. Compassion is the wish that oneself and others may be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Empathetic joy is taking delight in others' joys and virtues instead of envying them. And equanimity is a sense of impartial caring for all beings without distinction. Now, each of these mental states has a counterfeit with which it can easily be confused. For instance, self-centered attachment and craving can be mistaken for loving kindness. That's what we usually call romantic love. Grief and despair can be confused with compassion, and that leads to depression. Hedonism and frivolous happiness are counterfeits of empathetic joy, and apathy and indifference are false facsimiles of equanimity. When skillfully cultivated, each of these qualities can help the others put the others on track. No, hedonism, for instance, and frivolous happiness are remedied with loving kindness. Apathy and indifference are remedied with compassion. Grief and despair are remedied with empathetic joy, and self-centered attachment and craving are remedied with equanimity. And specific meditative practices are designed to cultivate each of these mental traits, but their efficacy depends in large part on the degree to which one has achieved balance in the cognitive, attentional, and cognitive domains, which are deeply interrelated with emotional balance. And attempts to cultivate one while ignoring the others are certainly bound to yield very little progress. Now, one of the most important and interesting aspects of training concerns the relation between loving kindness and equanimity. In this context, equanimity is not simply a feeling of calm and poise, rather it is a sense of impartiality towards friends, strangers, and adversaries, recognizing that each one equally deserves to be healed from inner causes of misery. Loving kindness is defined as the heartful yearning that all may find happiness. But when it goes astray, it is reduced to a type of selfish affection for people one finds appealing. So, in general, the cultivation of these four balances is deemed central in the Buddhist tradition to optimal mental health. And it produces, or it acts as one of the main causes of genuine happiness. Genuine happiness is quite different from stimulus-driven and hedonic pleasures. And this is a way of flourishing that underlies and suffuses all emotional states, embracing all the vicissitudes of life. In short, it is a way of engaging with life based on a sound understanding of reality. And this ideal is by no means unique to Buddhism or Asian religions. Aristotle emphasized the theme of what he called in Greek eudaimonia, often translated as genuine happiness or human flourishing. And in his Nicomachean Ethics, this is equated with the human good. He declared that it is disclosed as being at work of the soul in accordance with virtue, and with the virtues, and if the virtues are more than one, in accordance with the best and most complete virtue. So genuine happiness is not simply the endpoint or culmination of a meaningful life, but a characteristic of a person, developing ethical, psychological, and spiritual maturity. And this marvelous general notion of human flourishing requires each individual to determine which virtues are the best and most complete. And both religious and non-religious people can embrace this ideal of genuine happiness with specific attributes defined by each one in terms of his or her own worldview. Now, please keep in mind that from the Buddhist perspective, in order to reach this level of flourishing, virtue, wisdom, and a way of life that is conducive to genuine well-being must be intrinsically intertwined. So if we only center on virtue without wisdom, without a way of life that leads to genuine happiness, or we simply concentrate on wisdom in divorce and distance of ethics and a way of life to leads to genuine happiness, or we pursue genuine happiness without virtue and without wisdom, we will not be successful. But it is our nature and it is our potential to achieve genuine happiness. It is actually the essential purpose of life and the endeavor that gives life genuine meaning. So these are some ideas that I wanted to share with you in this marvelous quest for well-being that is the purpose of human life. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really look forward to reading over and listening to this again. Lots of beautiful nuggets of truth and wisdom given to us. And
these are all ideas that are central to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and they have been developed by a wonderful Buddhist scholar called Alan Wallace, who was the one that constructed this approximation to the cultivation of genuine happiness, which I share.
Thank you so much. No, this was really special. So this will be student-led, so I'm phasing out, and Emiliano, our very capable student leader, will facilitate the questions. So please go ahead, Emiliano.
Thank you, Dr. Musama. And thank you very much, Tony, for sharing all your insights and wisdom. So now we have first we have a question from Vero.
Hello, Tony. Good evening. I thank you for being here. And I just have one really quick question. Do you think that real altruism exists?
Definitely so. I think it definitely exists, and it is one of the most important endeavors that an individual should pursue in life. Being of benefit to others, truly helping others, especially when one understands that everybody seeks happiness and seeks to avoid or transcend suffering, and everybody deserves to be happy. And unfortunately, most people are unable to achieve genuine happiness because they are unable to identify that genuine causes that produce happiness, which are not money, which are not things, which are not fame, power, or recognition, which are not stimuli-driven experiences, but a mind that understands reality, that acts in equilibrium and balance with the body, and a way of life that leads to true self-actualization.
Thank you.
Great. So now we have a question from Miguel. Please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you very much for being here. So you talked a little bit about this, but I was wondering if you have any advice to someone that finds like their happiness is depending on someone else or on other people. So what type of advice would you give someone that is trying to find happiness for themselves, but is like depending on someone else?
Well, I would advise them to be aware of the fact that the type of well-being that they can derive from such a relationship is short-lived. If your well-being depends on another person, and the nature of that person is impermanent, and the nature of yourself is impermanent, then the pleasure or the well-being that you derive from that relationship will also be impermanent, and therefore not genuine happiness. No? That doesn't mean that you cannot rely on somebody else. That doesn't mean that somebody else cannot act as a contributing cause of your happiness. But I think the most important thing is to try to determine and investigate what are the genuine, authentic, and true causes of your happiness. true sources of happiness, no? And that genuine true sources of happiness cannot be found in stimuli-driven pleasures, including people, no? If such a person existed, then that person would be the most popular individual in the universe. If somebody was a genuine source of well-being and happiness, there would be thousands and upon thousands of people wanting to interact with that individual, wanting to get close to that person who is a true, genuine source of happiness. The fact is that the well-being that you derive from that relationship doesn't only depend on that person, but it really depends on the way that you perceive and interact with that person. Thus, your mind is the basic source of your well-being. And genuine happiness is that state that emanates, that grows out of that understanding and not out of that dependency that steals your freedom and makes you a slave.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going with Andrea Islas.
Hi, hello, Tony. Thank you for the talk that you just gave us. And my question is, how do you practice every day to work, to put your energy in the things that you want, and instead of the things that sometimes your mind goes to? Thank you.
Well, there's two things that are very important. First, educating your mind to be present and attentive. That is the first dimension of mental training in the Buddhist contemplative tradition. And there's a very simple exercise that's called anapanasati in Sanskrit, or the recollection of breath. And what you basically do is, for some minutes every day, maybe 20, 25 minutes every day, you sit with your back very straight. You can close your eyelids, and you simply attend to the natural flow of your breath. You don't control it, you don't manipulate it, you simply notice the natural flow of the breath. You become conscious and attentive of that usually automatic process. Now, when your attention is distracted, when it is dominated by excitation, when it follows all types of ideas or stimuli, then by means of applying introspection, which is that faculty of mind that allows you to observe, to detect or signal the presence of a mental factor or attitude that disrupts the continuum of attention, then you notice that you've been distracted and you bring gently your mind back to the natural attention of the breath. And then again, when you notice that your mind becomes dull, when your mind is prone to lassitude, to mental sinking, to the loss of clarity, or to sluggishness or sleepiness, then you stimulate your mind again, perhaps by attending to the in-breath, which naturally propitiates clarity of mind, and bringing back your attention to the natural flow of the breath. And if you do this repeatedly for several months, you will be training your mind to become attentive. You will be able to place your mind wherever you want to place it, without distraction and without laxity. The two basic, the two basic distractions that affect the natural continuity of attention, no? So this is a first exercise. And then the second exercise that you might find useful is, with that type of attention and concentration, you bring your mind upon itself and try to detect, to become aware of the mental processes that very often operate in you in a habitual, unconscious manner, see? And you make them conscious. And then you're able to discern which of those are positive or negative, are constructive or destructive, lead to happiness or lead to pain. And then you make an internal decision to strengthen those that are virtuous and positive, and to debilitate those that are not virtuous and positive. And then you finish your meditation with a conviction and determination to keep this in mind through the day. This is something anybody can do, very simple and very transformative.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So next we have a question from Sophie.
Thank you, Emmy, and thank you so much, Tony, for being here with us today. My question will be, you started our conversation today by saying self-importance and how it is a main cause of suffering. So today, you know that around the world, and especially your generation, is bombarded with why we're so important and defending our identities, and especially for this audience where we have a lot of people that are already leaders or will be leading a lot of people, how, if you could go deep into this self-importance and the relationship we should have with it, and what do you think is the best understanding we can have about this, and to have a balanced perspective? Thank you.
Well, I remember a quote from Carlos Castaneda in one of his books, The Journey to Ixtlan. And he said several things. And I remember a quote where he says that in a world where death is a hunter, there is no time for regrets. There's no time for doubt. There's only time for decisions. And he used to say that for me, the world is weird because it is stupendous, because it is awesome, because it is mysterious, because it is unfathomable. And my interest has been to convince you that you must assume responsibility for being here in this marvelous world, in this marvelous desert, in this marvelous time. I want to convince you that you must learn to make every act count, since you are going to be here for only a short while. In fact, too short for witnessing all the marvels of life. And self-importance is one of the most terrible venoms that divorce people from reality. No, self-importance is our greatest enemy. Now think about it. What weakens us is feeling offended by the deeds and the misdeeds of our fellow men. Our self-importance requires that we spend most of our lives offended by someone. Isn't that a source of scandal? Our self-importance requires that we spend most of our lives offended by someone. Now, if you don't have self-importance, there's nobody to be offended. And there's no energy to be invested in that type of neurotic behavior. That is a true detriment for the quality of our lives and the achievement of genuine happiness. No? Think about it. I think this is very important.
Thank you. Just I would like to follow up with the question. It's not like beating ourselves down, or not valuing or ourselves. It's how can we get on that a balanced perspective?
The absence of self-importance is simply the cultivation of humility. And humility doesn't mean deprecating yourself. No, it simply means not exaggerating your qualities or not trying to impose yourself upon others, or not trying to make others less in order for you to be higher or better. No, it's being humble and simply understanding that when you compare yourself with the world itself, there's always somebody that is more intelligent. There's always somebody that is more clever. There's always somebody that is richer. There's always somebody that is more beautiful, more intelligent. No? So this idea of trying to pop up yourself all the time, be unique and completely different, it takes so much energy, and it's always condemned to failure. No?
I see. Thank you.
So we have a question from the chat from Javier. He says, hello, I have the following question. What relation do you think there is between happiness and loneliness, given that people have different approaches to loneliness? I remember this topic because you mentioned Etika Nikoman.
Well, a person that has achieved genuine happiness doesn't need anybody to be happy. While a person that centers well-being and happiness on others is terrified about about not being accompanied by others. No, so I think it's not that you don't want to interact with others, but I think the idea is that you don't need to interact with others in order to be happy. So any interaction is simply, the cherry on the pie. It's something extra, but it's not something that you truly need. Now, if you don't know yourself, and if you're not acquainted with yourself, naturally you don't like being with yourself, or you're scared about yourself, or you need other people to fill your lives. But if you know yourself and you're full, and if you're satisfied with yourself, you're also completely satisfied with being alone. It's actually a wonderful time. I enjoy that time more than anything else.
Thank you, Tony. So now we have a question from Valeria.
Thank you. My question is, how would you define leadership, or how could we practice leadership from the Buddhist approach, taking into account integrity and the pursuit of genuine happiness?
I think a true leader is the person that guides others to the actualization of genuine happiness and well-being, and truly cares for that well-being and happiness of others, and is not motivated by some type of personal benefit, which does not consider the right and the dignity of the other's aspiration for happiness and its sources. So genuine leadership is always a leadership that is based on compassion, a leadership that is based on loving kindness, a leadership that is based on empathetic joy, and it's based also on equanimity. These four qualities that I mentioned are indispensable for the cultivation of emotional balance, one of the basic components of optimal mental health.
Thank you.
Does anybody else has a question in the remaining minutes of the session?
I have a question, Emiliano. In a world that is torn, a post-pandemic world, a world that is now in the midst of war, what proactive steps is your center taking in terms of dispensing peace around the world?
Education based on loving kindness, based on compassion, based on empathetic joy, and based on equanimity. An education centered on the understanding of interdependence, the fact that genuine well-being cannot arise in an individual or society in complete distance or independence of the well-being of others, and the understanding that if we seek to survive as a species and as individuals in this world, we need to cultivate love. And if we don't do that, then our species is condemned to extinction.
Thank you, sir.
We have another question from Andrea Montiel.
Yes, it's more of a for you question. Don't you find exhausting to live in the moment? Because I tend to dream a lot, daydreaming and being somewhere else and numbing being here. Obviously I enjoy the now, but when I try to be all the time here, it's exhausting. And I don't know if it's just me or if that is normal, or yes, I would like to know.
Well, I would answer your question with another question. Don't you find it exhausting not to be in the present? And then again, when we talk about being present, it also has to be accompanied with the absence of demands and expectations. Because when you're present, but at the same time you're demanding things to happen, and you are filled with all types of desires and projections, that's what's really exhausting. But if you're simply present without demands, without expectations, without dreaming, without demanding anything, then there's a sense of relaxation that is endemic to that type of presence. Complete relaxation of being in the present and being able to accept whatever arises. No? Sometimes somebody asked me, no, they said, how is it, how do you manage to, let's see, they framed it. How are you able to survive this world by meditating? And I said, or I answered, how are you able to survive the world without meditating? No? If you don't have a tool that brings you back to the present, that brings you back to your body, that allows you to disengage from this recurrent attitude of distractfulness, of being always somewhere else, no? Then your life simply passes and you're unable to really take a hold of it, no? Live it fully. You have to be present, no? This is essential.
Thank you so much.
So we have a final question from Sebastian. Please go ahead.
Hello. So I have a question for you because, as you said, you have children nowadays. And how do you teach children to let go desire and to stop with the expectations maybe that they could have, mainly the desire?
Well, what I talked about in my talk, I teach them to distinguish between stimuli-driven pleasures and genuine happiness, and understanding not that stimuli-driven pleasures are bad or evil, but that they're short-term, that they cannot produce or provide us with genuine, long-lasting happiness. Not that you should do away with them, but that you should not project upon them something that they're unable to give or grant you. And when you're conscious about that, little by little, this type of desire that very often consumes our mind lessens and becomes less powerful. Then you're able to really turn your mind to the true source of well-being, which is wisdom, virtue, and understanding.
Emiliano, thank you so much for leading our conversation piece. And to all the students, thank you for your ear to listen and to hear, and hopefully to seek to understand and to grow and take action in a world that requires us to take action. With the last few minutes that we have with you, sir, if you have any closing remarks, would truly appreciate that.
Well, just keep in mind that life passes like a bolt of lightning in the midst of the night. And if we're not present, it will simply fade away and we won't be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much for your patience.
Well, it's been a delight. It's been an honor. We look forward to learning and growing from you in the future, and all the resources that are available for our students will share. And to the students, I'd say to you, the struggle is real in terms of fighting for your sanity, fighting for your focus, fighting for, the pillars that keep us in this balance that we've heard about today. Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself in this journey. And as we say in Africa, the best way to eat an elephant is to eat it one bite at a time. So let's start taking small bites and let's get there together. Mr. Karam, thank you so much, and we wish you Godspeed, and we wish you every good success in your work.
Thank you so much. All my best to all of you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow. Mariana, what are you thinking? You're like this.
Like in everything, you know, it was like really inspiring. I love it. I skipped all my classes for today.